everything I've seen in 20 years of running the security team at DEF CON, which, as you can imagine, has been crazy. Like, every possible insane thing you can imagine has happened, and some things you probably can't imagine too. So, I've been hacking since the 80s, member of the British hacking group Agents of Hostile Power. In fact, I was one of the founders. Member of the CDC's Ninja Strike Force. I organized HOPE and HOPE 2K early. I was the only joint staff member between HOPE and DEF CON, which was challenging. And I'm not the head of network security at DEF CON, because there is actually a separate network team. I'm the head of security, which means a lot more shit. My first DEF CON was the Plaza, which was around DEF CON 6. And I walked in, and the elevators to the Plaza Hotel opened. And inside the elevators were the satellite dishes from the roof of the hotel, riding up and down. And I thought, these are my people. I went upstairs, and they'd been remodeling the hotel, and they had these new smoke alarms installed, and they'd been putting them up on the ceiling. And someone pulled one down, and they were working out what to do with it. So they caught the elevator, threw it in the elevator, and pressed down. It goes down. It then pulls every single smoke alarm off the ceiling, all the way around the hotel. You can hear the pops as they're coming down. We had to escort Jeff Moss out of the hotel in a phalanx of people around him. Jeff Moss is the founder of DEF CON. Because the hotel wanted to speak to him, the FBI wanted to speak to him, the police wanted to speak to him, and I'm sure quite a few other people wanted to speak to him. That was my first DEF CON. You probably know my hacks more than you know me. So I hacked a ton of mobile phones. I used to work for Vodafone, spent 10 years. I developed the first mobile phone exploit on an old Nokia feature phone. I hacked Google Glass not long after it came out. That's actually one of the ones I'm most proud of. I developed an image that if you looked at it with Google Glass, it hacked Glass. I immediately wrote to Neil Stevenson and told him, I've done Snow Crash. Touch ID, I got into a race with Starbug from CCC. The race was who could hack Touch ID first. He had a 4 or 5 hour lead because of time zones. I hacked it within 12 hours and bypassed it. Now, to be fair, it's one of those classic, if I have seen far, it's because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. I leveraged research done by a very, very bright Japanese researcher who had worked out how to build imitation fingerprints using molds based out of etched PCB boards. And I essentially copied the same technique. The only bits I added was I lifted a fingerprint off of a glass, duplicated it, used the mold, created it, and opened it. And then when they brought out the updated version, which was, I think, the 6S, I hacked that after 4 hours. Improvement. Oh, the Tesla Model S. That was fun. So I hacked it, actually 2 years before Chris and Charlie did theirs. But I spent 2 years working with Tesla trying to get them to fix the bugs. And I'll get into this a little bit with some other stuff. Because all the bugs were ranked as medium or low, they didn't see them as important. Now, the reality is, the way we classify bugs is bad. And we have to think about this. Because I can take a bunch of low bugs, and if each bug gives me an inch, and I can use enough of them, I can take a mile. And what happened with the case of the Tesla was I was able to leverage a bunch of very low-rated bugs and then drive Elon's car with my iPhone. He wasn't impressed. He fired his CIO. Face ID, almost. I can break facial recognition on Android. I can break it on Microsoft, and I'm this close to breaking it on Apple. And Apple is actually super friendly about this. They've been talking to me, and they've built a really good system. But I know it can be broken, because I believe anything man makes, man can break. And that's something that all of you hackers also know. And finally, I've been doing a lot of other car stuff, and tire pressure measurement systems is one of my play areas at the moment. Did you know military vehicles have a tire pressure measurement system that will auto-inflate cars, auto-inflate the tires? You can spoof the signal to tell it that the tire is deflated. None of the signal is encoded. It has a simple 32-bit up to 128-bit ID. So long as you know the frequency and you can transmit, you can replay. And if you transmit, I see nodding going on here. And if you keep transmitting it, you can end up with a military vehicle with really big tires. They don't like that. I can also say, this is for another talk, but everything is going to change from 2020. I've been working deep with a bunch of automotive industry bodies and on a few other expert areas, and between everybody who's been working on this, the automotive, as you know it, is going to fundamentally change, which just means the games will start again. So, yeah, 20 years of hacking at DEF CON, I've seen a lot. Recruitment by the mob. They threw a party. They hired the Bellagio, top floor of it, threw a party known by DEF CON staff as the Hookers and Blow Party. And they invited all of the young hackers they could find to come to this party, basically so they could get compromat on them. And unfortunately, some people went. We tried to spread the word like, don't go, you're an idiot. But a few people went. But that was a thing. Fake ATMs, that's a fake ATM that was found in DEF CON. It stopped working after a while. I have no idea why. Hacked hotel locks. Oh God, last year. Some of you may know I resigned last year because of this. I was told I'm not allowed to resign. I was told by my entire department that if I resigned, they would resign. But the challenge there was not only were the security people in the hotel going into rooms, which was bad, but they had implemented the most insane lock system using RFID. They'd taken MyFair cards. They're originally using MyFair Classic, which is broken. And rather than bothering to just spend the extra 20 cents per card to move to the MyFair Plus standard, which is more secure, they decided, we'll do away with keys completely. So all the data blocks on the card are open. And instead, they generate a hash using the room number, checkout information, and a random nonce from the hotels. I now have, I believe, enough cards. I've got about 2,500. Don't ask me how I got them. I'm going to build a rainbow table. And I'm going to have a look. Let's see what we can find out. But the problem, it doesn't just affect like the Caesars hotels. It affects the whole of Vegas. I stayed at MGM a few months ago. Same deal. And what this means is, while it's difficult to make a new card, i.e. to get into a room that you're not part of because you have to know how to make the hash, copying a card, you can copy any card with a Proxmark in less than a second because there's nothing stopping you. And so rooms were getting burglarized because people were copying maids' keys, accessing rooms, and burglarizing them. So when you hear about the confiscated soldering irons and things like that, no, that wasn't security. That was thieves. And we have to solve that. So, more fun. Yeah, and obviously almost every kind of hack you imagine. Every year I spend time trying to stop someone from going to jail because they heard something really cool in a talk and decided to play it. Probably one of the saddest was couple goes to Vegas, couple gets married in Vegas on their honeymoon night, husband decides to show off his skills and hacks an ATM in the middle of the casino floor. The casino floor, which is the most surveilled piece of land in the world, and gets picked up within minutes. And he gets taken in, and they're deciding whether or not to prosecute him, so they call me, and my job is to talk them down, make sure he doesn't get prosecuted, because I don't like to see hackers go to jail. But then they say, well, we're going to trespass you at least. And they turn to his wife and say, but we're not going to trespass you. You can stay if you want. And she sat there for a minute and genuinely thought about it. I don't blame her. Well, yeah, so the slides have gotten a bit weird, but the public today is really aware of cybersecurity, right? Way more than they ever were before. Part of that's because of the stuff we see on TV, part of that's because of the amount of breaches we have, but we have a really long way to go because there's so much misinformation floating around and there's so much misconception, it doesn't necessarily help. And the reality is, if we want to solve these problems, we as a community can solve these problems, but we need to arm the rest of the citizens with the tools to do this because we can't scale. Right? There are not enough of us to solve these problems. But if we can take people and arm them with at least the basic tools to solve the basic problems, then we can focus on the complicated problems. And the way we do that is we teach people to think like hackers. And that doesn't mean teaching them to be super technical. It means teaching them to be inquisitive. It means teaching them to challenge things. It means teaching them to think outside the box. And I think it's 100% doable. But, and I'll get to it in a minute, there's a big challenge there, and that's education. So, this is just insane, right? The most simple hacks are the ones that bring everything down. Every breach you hear about, right? It's simple. It's a phishing attack. It's someone left a USB stick. It's someone inserted something into a network. We're not talking about APTs. We're not talking about cyber weapons. We're talking about stupidity. And yet, company after company fall to this. Black Hat, 3 years ago, fell to USB sticks. When I say Black Hat, I mean attendees of Black Hat. Some guy shows up, throws a bunch of USB sticks down in Black Hat, and you think, Black Hat, okay? This is a pretty savvy audience, right? No, they plugged them all into their laptops. The next day, the guy shows up, and he redistributes more USB sticks, this time containing all the files he exfiltrated from the other people's laptops. And I'm not allowed to say how many federal agents got caught out. Bad. This... What happens in Vegas doesn't necessarily stay in Vegas. What happens in Vegas sometimes causes an international incident. Don't ask me about Area 51 and balloons. You can't really read this very much, but what this is a storm of deals. What happened last year was some smartass decided to use DEF CON as cover to do a heist. And so what they did was they got modified mobile devices. I believe they were Nexus 5s, but not 100% sure because I didn't get a close look. And they tipped off the FBI that DEF CON's badge makers were issuing badges that would do deauths. And then they were deauthing the backhaul for some of the slot machines. Because even though it's illegal for slot machines to have a wireless backhaul, they're supposed to be wired, some of them do because they have to move them around. And so they were knocking these slot machines off the network and then man-in-the-middling them so they could put fake vouchers or replay vouchers through and just keep running and make money. Meanwhile, the FBI and the hotel security are running around with these big yellow flukes, and of course every time they see a guy looking like an official with a big yellow detection thing, they put the phone in the pocket and no one catches anything. I grabbed Kristen Paget, and we went downstairs with a laptop running Ubuntu, picked up the biggest antennas we could find in the vendor area, and we sat in the bar and drank beer and captured this. And not only did we capture all of the deauth packets, but we also caught them logging into their S3 buckets and a few other things. Don't mess with my family. Things are moving faster all the time. It used to be that you would see vulnerabilities come out and sit around for years, not much happen with them. But criminals have worked out how to monetize stuff. And the monetization is accelerating things. You see it in malware world, like banking Trojans, where organizations have set themselves up like enterprises, and they turn money back into R&D. And they churn out new pieces of malware all the time. Well, the same thing with hardware. And the good example here is the key fob relay attack. How many of you are familiar with it? Okay, so the key fob you use to gain access to your car is just a radio device. It doesn't really have any special security other than the fact it has a rolling code to authenticate. If you put a repeater between your key fob, which can be in your bedroom, and your car, which can be in a car park a few hundred meters away, you can relay the connection. And your car opens. And they drive off. They're now seeing 10, 20% of vehicle thefts in San Francisco as a direct result of key fob attacks. Because it's easy. And here's where it gets scary. It was theorized in 2010. Theorized. Right? Not even a proper prototype built. And then Unicorn team built their first demo, I think, in 2012. And then they built another demo in 2013 that cost $20 to make. That's the $20 version. Within 6 months of that, you can go onto various dark websites, you can go onto Google, and you can buy these devices for $100 a shot. So that's 3 years from theory to production and use by active criminals. Right? We're behind the curve, and somehow we have to get ahead of the curve. I wanted to put up a picture of what the media thinks of hackers. Like, there are just some people here who really just aren't hackers. Sorry. I have a bit of a beef with Julian Assange. So. I've known him for years. He's an asshole. Sorry. Anyway, but this is what the media think we are. And that's a problem, because as long as they think we're like this, you'll never get big enterprises or governments to really, truly trust us. I work in the US, and I work with the US government, and I work with all sorts of folks. I even work with my own government, the UK government, through the US government, because I can't work with the UK government because I'm a hacker and they don't trust me. What? Somehow, we have to destroy this image that we are a bunch of assholes and make people realize that we can actually help solve problems. Because until we do that, we can't help solve some of the other bigger problems. And I'm incredibly proud to be speaking here, because Israel is one of the few countries I've seen that gets it and that consistently turns out jaw-droppingly good cybersecurity professionals, with the exception of Gadi. This is why I did Mr. Robot. Really? A Cat 5 from a jumbo jet into a Ferrari, into a laptop? What? Really?
That's a good idea, actually.
Yes. Well, apparently they did it.
But that's only like the first episode.
I can't watch CSI Cyber because I throw things at the TV. That's why I got into Mr. Robot, because I wanted to make sure the hacks on the TV didn't make me break things. And my wife fully endorsed it, because she's tired of me breaking things and punching walls and stuff. And Mr. Robot actually what they do is nothing special. They issue us a script, and instead of saying, and they do this and this happens, they leave a hole. They say, we would like this to happen. And I'm not the only expert. There are a team of experts. And we all get together and talk about stuff. And we theorize what the best way is to deal with this stuff. And we come up with the best hacks. And they don't always like it, because hacks aren't always really complicated. So, for example, they wanted Elliot to steal a Zipcar at one point. And you won't see it in the show, because it didn't make the cut, because they didn't like my idea. So for those of you who don't know what a Zipcar is, it's basically a rental car, like those horrible scooters you see lying around everywhere. You go up with a RFID card, press it up against the windscreen, it dials back with a modem and validates whether or not you're allowed to get into the car. That then unlocks the car, you get in. The keys to the car are chained to the steering column, so you just press start and drive off, okay? So they wanted us to hack into the company and bypass the firewall and add in an account and make an infinite card. I wanted to put a brick through the window and get in the car. That's hacking. Hacking is smart, and hacking is lazy. Information warfare is probably the thing that scares me the most, because everything's changed. All these bugs that we have written off for decades as informational are now potentially critical. Whether it leaks a piece of information that could be used, or whether it allows you to put information up somewhere, it's potentially a problem. If I'd gone to a car company 5 years ago and said, I have a bug that lets me put up a smiley face on your dashboard, they'd laugh at me and say, won't fix. Well, take a look at that. It is not hard, and this gentleman can confirm that, to display that kind of information on an infotainment system in any kind of transport system, including airplanes. Now you imagine if I put that on every airplane in the United States simultaneously.
Challenge accepted.
Dude, haven't you been banned from enough airlines?
I own United. That's going on every fucking news.
Just with an informational, low-risk bug, you could ground the entire US commercial airline fleet. That means we really need to start thinking about what does context mean in this stuff. The other problem is the way many of these companies are addressing fake news and
Don't ask. Just deny everything.
in my eye on you.
Recording off.
The way companies are addressing this stuff is not going to work. Right? Twitter sort of started going in the right direction with their shadow banning, which they now deny exists. Preventing the propagation of some of this stuff is one of the right ways to handle it. Deleting it is the best way to handle it. But okay, I understand there are potential issues there. But if you have harmful misinformation, you need to do something about it. And Facebook's response to say, well, we believe it's part of the conversation, we're going to leave it, but put a warning on it, is absolutely the wrong thing to do. Because putting a warning on something has never stopped it from being distributed. In fact, if you put a warning on it, I'm 100 times more likely to look at it. Education. This is the really important thing. When I moved to America, I was stunned. I live in San Francisco. I moved originally to Silicon Valley. I started a company. None of the schools in Silicon Valley offer computing classes. None. The schools outside Google don't have laptops. What? This is insane. We have children who are graduating from schools who are not prepared for the world they're moving into, and they're going to be the victims of tomorrow, and it's completely avoidable. And this is dumb. Like, why? And at the same time, these kids, if we educate them, are the army who can take down the disinformation. Because they are way more connected and way more switched on to online material than we'll ever hope to be. I watched my 11-year-old daughter sitting on the sofa with 3 devices simultaneously, playing Roblox on one, talking to a friend on another, and abusing other people on other. And it's like, I don't understand the context switching. They're born with it. It's inherent. We need to harness it. And the other thing is, if we want to keep young hacker kids out of jail, we need to find them, we need to train them, and we need to harness them. Right now, there is a 16-year-old kid in America who is facing 16 felonies for sending phishing emails to his school to change his grades. That cannot keep happening. It's ridiculous. Oh, and sorry, I wanted to mention, nod to Karen. I believe that children, just like hackers, can be the immunity of the internet system. So, conclusion. Our democracy really has been hacked. And in many ways, we've let it. Like, we've seen a lot of this stuff go on, and we haven't taken any action.
We didn't hack enough last time round to get the vulnerable in. We need to hack more servers. We need to hack more this time round.
I mean, hacking back is one thing.
And about the voting machines.
But the voting machines are not the problem. It's great they bring them to DEF CON and they analyze them and they find vulnerabilities and they make them run Doom and silly stuff like that. That's great. Love to see it. We get 5 congressmen at DEF CON every year. That's fantastic. We get all sorts of people from every kind of part of the government you can imagine. That's great. But those aren't the problems that are affecting things. It's disinformation that's polarizing people and giving them the wrong idea about the world and politicians and policies that's the problem. And somehow we have to suppress that and stop foreign nations from being able to inject their propaganda into our systems. And until we start focusing on that, we're not going to stop the problem. And as I mentioned, we need to rethink how we classify threats. Oh, and as a last thing, the 90s would really like their vulnerabilities back, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. Would you be willing to take a few questions from our audience?
Absolutely. And
okay.
Just one thing. Questions about crazy shit that happened at DEF CON come with a price. Buy me alcohol and I'll tell you everything.
Well, you don't even have to buy the alcohol. You can join us at the after party where we have beers and, as you can see, so Mark, let's take some questions from the audience. Anybody has a question? Mark, your choice.
Me? Okay, good.
Don't be shy.
You talked about problems and you talked about our responsibilities as a community for things what we do and how to change it. And sometimes when I see DEF CON and I see all the lectures and how we give the tools and make it so easy so kids can, when kids watching it, they don't understand what we're doing, so they take our tools and our developments and use it for evil purposes, and I think we are responsible for that. We're responsible for the easy things, we're responsible for the GitHub, for the open source. I don't think it's a bad thing, it's a cool thing to learn as a community, but we are to blame here.
I actually had this very conversation a week ago. I had a very interesting presentation. It was me, a climate change expert who's trying to fix New Orleans, and a professor of virology. And we were talking about availability of information, and he believes firmly that certain pieces of information should be restricted and not passed out. I believe, as a hacker, that knowledge is power. And I believe also that sunlight is the best disinfectant. The sheer fact that these things can cause harm is because there are problems that they affect. bringing them out into the light. It's one of the reasons why I fought with many others for responsible and then coordinated disclosure throughout the 90s. The only way you will get these things fixed is to make them known. And so I think it's perfectly okay for that stuff to be out there. Huh?
Then why not fake news too?
Because fake news is a different harm. Like a vulnerability or a tool that exploits a vulnerability is exploiting a specific flaw that can be fixed. Fake news, the flaw is an ISO layer 8 problem. It's a problem between the keyboard and the seat. And that's much harder to fix. I'm not a psychologist. I only play one on TV. I'm not going to sit down and counsel every person in the world. Now, we absolutely do have to think along those lines and come up with a way to teach people to recognize fake news and to challenge what they see. Totally agree. But until we do that, the next safest course is to castrate it. Stop it from spreading. Maybe delete it if it's bad enough. If it's a lie, why should it be allowed to propagate? If it's a disjointed perspective, then maybe there's a different conversation to be had. But I don't claim that it's an easy solution. Right? If it was an easy solution, we'd have fixed it.
Was it your idea for the Raspberry Pi skin? Mr. Robot, that now found in the NSA? NASA. Sorry.
No comment. And if any of you remember the end of season 2, the femtocell, I still have it at home. It really upset the FBI because it worked.
Oh, Kristen did it in 2012.
So what?
Kristen Paget did it in 2012.
The-
Well, Kristen Paget, I think, did it in 2012.
Yeah.
Up to cell.
Yeah. Christian Paget lives a few miles away from me, so we sort of get together and try to take over the world.
2 questions, if they're quick.
Yeah, can I?
Yep.
I'm usually working with, for hacking or stuff like cyber. I'm working with Kali Linux, but I kind of have a problem with the network bit. I'm always getting, if I'm typing ifconfig, I get only F0, like the Ethernet, instead of the wireless.
So my usual rate for administrative support is $15 an hour. I know the guys who wrote it. If you ping me the question, I can certainly forward it on to them. I don't use Kali. And the reason, Kali is convenient. It's nice. It's got a lot of tools in one place. However, I build custom builds with the right tools for the right project. So, for example, I have mobile phones with partial Kali builds on them that look like ordinary phones, but have some of the Kali tools. They will go through any security check. You can take them into secure locations and still do stuff. Kali, on the other hand, if you walk into a lot of places with Kali, you're going to get spotted. So I do it slightly differently, so I can't answer you immediately, but happy to help you get the answer. One more? Yeah.
Well, as a cyber vigilante, you like to find exploits and let people know about those exploits so they can be fixed and a world will be better. But how, do you never have these problems where you find a vulnerability and you want to get the company or whoever is responsible for it to know about it, but you just don't have the amount of power? You're not a politician. How do you get them to know about it?
So that's why we developed responsible disclosure and coordinated disclosure, to put pressure on the companies to fix stuff. And brutally honest, I didn't start out white. I started out as a black hat. And some of the vulnerabilities I found, I didn't want fixed. My favorite vulnerability, this is going to date me and maybe date anyone who understands it. Does anyone know what host.equiv is on a Unix box? Yeah. So host.equiv was a configuration file that says any system in that file can log in with root privileges without a password. What I discovered, and this was long before Dan Kaminsky, was that you could modify bind and allow it to send out whatever address you wanted. And so I spoofed my IP address to always be the hash symbol. What's the first entry in any config file? I had root on the internet. And it lasted for a few years. But back then, Black Hat didn't bring you money, and all it brought you was a path that led to prison. And I got married, I got children, and so I changed. But back to your answer, you have to put pressure, and there are organizations that will help you put pressure. Are you familiar with the EFF?
The Electronic Frontier Foundation, Eva from the EFF was our first opening speaker today.
Yeah. Eva from the EFF is here. If you can find her and talk to her, she's phenomenal. The EFF as an organization, I consult them before every major hack I do. And they help me go after the companies. They shield me from the company's lawyers, because many times they try to sue you, and they guide me in the path to get the best resolution.
I absolutely support that recommendation. Speak to the EFF, speak to other organizations that can help you do responsible disclosure, coordinated disclosure.
So the difference between responsible disclosure and coordinated disclosure is responsible disclosure was assigning a defined timeline, giving a company control over when you were going to drop the ban hammer on them if they didn't fix it. Well, that doesn't work because you don't know how long it's going to take to fix some things. You might assign a time of 30 days, but it might take them 90. Coordinated disclosure means you engage with them and establish a process to set a time that they can work with. Katie Missouri was one of the authors on the Disclosure ISO. Highly recommend reading it. Katie is phenomenal. There's some really good stuff there. I also invite everyone in this room, if you have any problems with research, if you want any advice, reach out to me. I always want to help. You guys are my community, you're my family, I want to help.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.